The image of slavery as a large mass of suffering and forcibly restrained slaves controlled by a few powerful and cruel masters is a very simplistic and false view of modern slavery. Nowadays, slavery is accomplished very differently. Modern slavery is as much tactical and psychological as it is brute force. By far, the best kind of slave is one who agrees to be a slave, or who at least accepts the circumstances. And now psychological technology is used to cause people to choose slavery for themselves. I'll give you an example. Now, it's important to keep in mind that slavery was black master and black slave for many centuries before European whites took up the practice. Slavery is more about power than race. The brutal tactics and psychology of slave making are no secret. The example, in the 1700s, in the southern slave states, a wealthy landowner might have the task of setting up a plantation. Slaves would be purchased and gathered for indoctrination. The wealthy farmer would accuse a young male slave of defiance or non-compliance, and that young man would be horribly punished and killed, perhaps lynched or drawn and quartered by horses. This would be done in front of the slave women. Those slave women were deeply traumatized by the public spectacle of gratuitous violence against the innocent young black male. The slave women would then raise their sons to be compliant and subservient. Young black children would be sternly educated by their mothers in the type of behavior necessary to stay in the slave master's favor. By seeing one or more horrific event, the slave women became the school, the conditioning factory, the educators and brainwashers of the slavery collective, the new slave generation. An efficient system of slavery is not possible unless the slaves are made to enforce upon each other. By the time the black males reached adulthood, they were thoroughly conditioned by their parents and guardians to a slave's mentality and demeanor. This was the psyops of the 1700s, the shock and awe of the plantation system. Nowadays, the plantation owner is the state, the law, the police, the media, banks, and corporations, and the slaves are you and I. In the old plantations, the result of demonstrations of cruelty and violence was voluntary compliance. Young black males had never been encouraged, even by their family and friends, to think independently, to explore their aspirations and opportunities, or to believe in their own potential. Their souls and spirits were broken, their minds imprisoned, not just by the slave master, but by their own families and friends. Even when we can clearly see the slavery, we do not imagine that we are helping to create it by accepting and enforcing the rules and constraints that constitute the slavery. We warn our children to follow the rules so they will not be harmed by the state. This kind of social conditioning takes its toll. By the time the young black male plantation slave was working age, it was easy to see that he had no concept of how to question or defy authority, how to organize for justice, how to claim his rights, how to move against the system, or how to control his own destiny. No idea. This is what our state, our schools, and our media do to us and ask us to do to each other. As much as the state promotes the concept of gender equality, the state constantly exploits the differences between the genders, using gender against gender. Men are characterized as bullies or simpletons. Women are characterized as victims or protesters. Media and the state want to divide us in any way they can. Women and men have fundamentally different psychology, but they are designed to be a complementary team. Our differences are not a problem. Those differences actually make us stronger when we are partnered as a family unit. Expressed in primitive terms, the man in reckless defiance will face the enemy, whether it's an attacking tribe, the wild beast, the threat of nature's elements. The men will face the threat, while the women will protect the children, will hide, and will obey the orders of the protectors. These impulses are hardwired into the genders. Since ancient Egypt, this psychology has been exploited to create and control slaves. There need be no prison walls. There need be no constant administration of force. Slavery is programming, social and psychological programming. Force is only necessary for those who have accidentally or momentarily acted like a free and sovereign individual. Force is for people who forget to act like slaves. Regardless of how oppressed women may be in any given culture, they always have great influence over their men. Mothers have influence over their sons. Wives and female lovers have influence over their husbands and partners. By female influence, men are drawn into civilized behavior. These days, that means compliance with authorities, stable and conservative forms of livelihood, and behavioral moderation for social appearances to friends, neighbors, strangers, and authorities. And perhaps an overgeneralization, women are seeking safety and stability at all costs, while men are seeking adventure and freedom without due regard for risk. Women feel safer in a socially regulated environment, in a context of rules and monitored behavior, predictable ritual, and they press those sensibilities upon the men around them. The more reckless and coarse a man may act, the more pressure the woman will bring to regulate the behavior. So the slave master, the state, the collective, to be successful will target the woman, the rule follower, for initial compliance, and cause that woman to then pressure compliance and servitude on those around them, as they naturally tend to do. This may be called the woman's army, the front lines of the slave state, the essential mass of psychological influencers without which large-scale slavery would be impossible. Men are natural troublemakers, warriors, explorers, and there are too many of them to control with direct force by the state. Men will never be comfortable for long in the role of slave unless women are delegated to assist in the recruitment and management of the men's impulses for freedom. Women are more prone to accept and adopt rules without question. They are easily recruited to convey arbitrary rules to those around them. Women are highly influential in this way. Women are not helpless victims. They are society's best psychological influencers. They may believe they're helping the man succeed, but succeed in what? Volunteering for some form of pointless compliance, enlisting in some corrupt institutional agenda, acting like an obedient puppet to distant and mysterious control matrices, to pay all those taxes, fees, and fines, to enrich the state at crippling expense to the family and to society, to avoid conflict no matter what the cost. Women's civilizing influence was very effective and necessary in more barbaric times. The woman's good intentions have now been seized and repurposed as a mechanism of state control, as a way to assert central authority. Again, I speak very generally. There are many women who value freedom, opportunity, and the prosperity it brings. However, there are many others who adopt and advocate senseless rules and processes simply because they believe it will lead to social harmony. It leads to slavery. Men are sensitive to the wishes of the women around them. We can be pushed into unnatural states by those we love and trust. You can have a responsible and confident man, or you can have a compliant and conforming man, but you cannot have both of those things in full measure in one man. You get compliance at the cost of responsibility and confidence. A man cannot think for himself while he's under heavy social pressure to conform to arbitrary behavioral controls. So how can the woman bring out the best in her man? Ease off on the manipulation, encourage leadership and independent thinking? Perhaps, but it's actually, the fact is, being a man is the man's job. The man and the woman have to understand that they have different psychology and different roles in the relationship. Not necessarily traditional roles, but complementary roles based on their particular personalities, skills, and temperaments. A good relationship is not one where one person is controlling another. It is one where each person is supporting the other. It is cooperation and shared purpose. Where the partner is strong, encourage that strength. Where the partner is weak, provide support. Never compete within the team. Eliminate all internal conflict. Apply the full partnership to the external goals. Regardless of gender, if we pressure each other in any way to become something we are not, to stop questioning authority, to accept whatever corruption, control, and taxation comes with a promise of peace and order, we are inviting and enabling our own slavery. The promise of protection from outside is always false, is always a Trojan horse, is always a lure, and it is a lie. Compliance of the masses is not merely important to the state. Compliance is not something the state merely desires. Without compliance of the masses, there is no state. The term slavery and the term compliance are basically synonymous. Servitude and submission to institutional and collective agendas corrupts the natural, local, and family cultures. And by participating, we forfeit essential independence and self-determination, not to mention our wealth and our futures. We must not devote our lives to a corporation unless we know that corporation is equally dedicated to us and our families. The sociopathic and despotic politician or the corporate-controlled media can make laws and rules, can give us commands, tell us how to behave. They can take our money, our property, our freedom, and opportunity. But how can we fight that when our friends and family members are repeating those same commands and values to us as if it was their idea? The problem is that we repeat to each other what we hear from our media, our institutions, our corrupt politicians, and our government-controlled school teachers. And we must begin to think for ourselves. We become puppets and parrots of the repetitious messages we hear, and we allow those messages to reach us constantly. We flood ourselves with media and entertainment, packed with subliminal messages and contrived behavioral examples. We immerse ourselves in behavioral programming day in and day out. The state teaches us to see all rules and all laws as good, and all violators of those rules as bad. And this leaves no room for free thought or self-determination. No chance for reform of state-sponsored injustice. No ambition for personal advancement. We give corruption and tyranny a free pass, and we defeat freedom, rights, and hope for personal prosperity by dreaming of how we can better please the plantation master, as we hope that by pleasing that master we may receive an extra helping of beans. We're taught to never think for ourselves, to regard the largest, strongest, wealthiest institution as the one we must trust and join, and whose rules we must follow. We find ourselves seeking and attaching ourselves to the nearest slave master, because we have been told that is how our success shall be defined and measured. We will not be respected for our independence and creative thought, our self-reliance. We will be respected for the membership card we carry, because we're not free men, we're slaves. When we see all media and public officials as wise, powerful, honest, and all citizens as subject to their decrees, we create a huge temptation for those who would enslave us, exploit us, tax us, rob us, own us, control us. There is a class of person who finds personal gratification in controlling others, planning for others, administering the lives of others. Those people are drawn to public service and high corporate office for that purpose. The sociopath gets a natural thrill from controlling people as objects for his own personal gain, to push people around as if they were on some chessboard, to call them not people, but human resources. You are a resource, not for yourself, but for the collective, the planners, the manipulators, the slave masters. You are a resource to be applied and consumed for the benefit of the collective. And you are presumed to agree with that, unless you act otherwise. Many of us are perfectly willing to be dependent on public and commercial services without realizing this puts us in obligation of compliance, debt, and service to that system. But that system only exists to take what we have. Dependence is the mechanism through which you may be controlled and impoverished. There's no politician or bureaucrat who knows, loves, and protects you. If you're being offered something by an institution or a stranger, you are being lured into a trap. If it wasn't your idea, if you don't control it, you are a servant to it if you join, if you consent, if you participate, if you agree. Rules are always made to advantage the rule maker. A perfect example is traffic violation fines. The fine you pay enriches the court. It does not provide remedy to the victim because there is no victim. It is not a system of justice. It is a system of state enrichment. It is slavery. We were born to be responsible for ourselves. The adoption of external rules is fully artificial. If you are not making your own rules, you are being ruled. There's no safety or security in a system that keeps secrets from you, that takes and hides money from you, claims a monopoly on violence, and which uses that violence on a regular basis. A system which secretly creates massive crises so that it can offer fake solutions to those crises. And the solutions turn out to be more control, more taxation, fewer opportunities, rights, and freedoms. States are not benevolent paternal orders. States are human farms. We're all deeply conditioned for compliance by everyone around us. We're conditioned to have no integrity, no internal moral compass, no self-reliance, no curiosity, no doubt of authority. We are instead programmed with self-doubt and fear of failure in the eyes of some unseen slave master. We are kept in a state of fear and doubt by relentless media and political fear-mongering. We are convinced that we must pay great attention to our choices of detergent and chewing gum. We don't create and live by our own standards, overcome our own fears and weaknesses. We strive to define ourselves by meeting the standards of others. Imagine there are three kinds of people: those who control only themselves, those who control others, and those who are controlled by others. It is very obvious which of these three are healthier and more true to justice and human nature. It is very obvious that if you are being controlled by others, you are at the bottom of the social totem pole. If you are letting yourself be controlled, you are volunteering into slavery. We must begin to ask ourselves why a lifetime of work can produce nothing but a pile of debt. What is it about our laws, our institutions, our society that does that to us? Maybe compliance is not the solution. Maybe debt is harming us. Maybe consuming media propaganda all day has changed our mentality. Maybe institutions and corporations are constantly assaulting us with manipulations and diversions. Maybe they are sucking the life out of us. Maybe they are parasites. Our challenge in life as potentially free and independent individuals is to overcome the damage done to us in our youth as we were told to listen and obey. The damage that media and social conditioning do to us. The damage we do to each other. Parental mistakes. State propaganda, whatever. Our job as responsible adults is to discover and break the chains that are now invisible but tight around our necks, our heads, and our hearts. In the days of chained slavery, they needed to literally break the chains. In the days of psychological slavery, all we need to do is deny consent. Start questioning things and start making our own decisions. We cannot do this unless we start thinking more broadly, to wake up and recognize that slavery is all around us, and we are part of it. You didn't think you were a slave? You have a right to own property. Can you own property without paying lifelong taxation for simply exercising that right? You have a right to keep what you earn. Are part of your earnings taken in unpaid servitude? You have a right to be left alone, yet innocent people have their property and liberty foreclosed on a daily basis, not for any real crime, but for non-compliance, for nothing other than defiance of the slave master, for behavior that threatens the sociopathic judge or police officer, or simply enrich those who have borrowed the state-granted privilege to take what is yours. Can you even exercise your right to travel without paying for licenses for your vehicle and yourself as a driver? You are being taxed and penalized for exercising your rights. The law says your rights may not be infringed. Our labor, our freedom, our rights are being taken every day. We are slaves. In the USA, we have more than 5 times as many people in prison per capita than even the most overtly oppressive regimes on the entire planet. 85% of the people in our prisons committed no property damage, no violence or injury. 85% for what are called crimes when there was no victim. So for harmless behavioral non-compliance, you can go to prison for 10 years, 5 years, 20 years. It happens every day. This is not a free state, and as I speak, the police are militarizing. Slavery is about to go to a whole new level. The good news is most of it happens simply because we consent. We don't question. We don't hold public servants accountable. We don't demand their swift removal when they displease us. These mistakes are easy to change. People cannot be governed without their consent. If people are giving blind consent, complying, never questioning, never speaking out, they can not only be governed, they can be abused, taxed, imprisoned, or killed without consequences. The powers that be have clearly shown that they will take everything and anything that we allow them to take, anything we don't vigorously protect and defend, and they will never punish their own for the crimes they commit against us. Try to see yourself as the powerful elites see you. You are not regarded by greedy public institutions as free and independent people. You are presumed to be agreeing and complying with their agendas, plans, rules, and programs. You are presumed to be obligated and subject to punishment for non-compliance of policies you had nothing to do with creating. You are expected to pay your fees and taxes, to adjust your behavior, and to warn those around you to do the same. You are presumed to agree to all that because they found that when they presume you to be a slave, that many of us will play along. They seized upon our psychological flaws and weaknesses as the primary mechanism of their control. We're so conditioned that government can now create slaves by simply expecting us to be slaves. That is why any government, state, collective, or dictator will always claim the support of the silent. They simply invent the idea that you wish to be controlled, and then they will proceed to control you unless you resist. If you're looking around at what government and corporate interests are doing, if you can see where it is leading, it should be very clear that we had better start making some noise. We had better start providing some resistance. Any casual observer can tell you that what we now have is an emerging police state. Of course, we're told we have a free country, so that our eyes will glaze over in reflexive national pride. In the 1960s, reactionary nationalists used to say, "America, love it or leave it." Those who were more observant and thoughtful would answer, "America, change it or lose it." That was 50 years ago. We didn't change it, and we're now losing it. How do we get America back? How do we regain freedom and opportunity and prosperity? By refusing to be slaves, by turning off the propaganda, by setting our own goals and making our own decisions, by questioning authority, by commanding our own lives.